Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Music Writing, Ranking, and Reviewing podcast, what I call Music Meltdown, in which we rate, rank, and review any artist's discography, songs, musical topics, really whatever comes to mind. This episode, it's another part of the Album of the Year series, nearing the end of the 60s, and with my favorite year of the 60s, and picked for one of my favorite years in general, being 1968. I think this year is just absolutely loaded. I believe looking at it now, I have like 10 records at 4.5 stars or higher. I could legitimately do a top 10 and still be talking about 9 out of 10s for me. And I might, but I boiled it down to 5 and I'm really happy with it. I think I'm going to talk about some stuff that's kind of adjacent to the mainstream, but is still well regarded and well loved, which is kind of how I would define my 60s opinions as a whole. But Andrew, your take on 1968?
Another top class year for me. Maybe the first one in a while where I don't feel like they're building, but it's just kind of staying at a high level of greatness. And I won't get into it too much yet, but it might have my favorite record of any year. So we'll be talking about that later.
I feel like I know what that record is, and now I'm sad. But no. Like I said, 10 records that I think are just great in this year. I'm going to talk about 3 of them that didn't quite make it. I joke with you about them not making last year, but they actually do get an honorable mention from me this year, being the Birds, the Bees, and the Monkees. As well, an artist that made my top 5 last year, but wasn't quite good enough to make it into here for me, being the Kinks are the Village Green Preservation Society. Another great record by them. And then an album that I don't think gets talked about nearly enough, one that I'm digging back into Motown, going to be Love Child by Diana Ross and the Supremes. I listened to this a couple of weeks ago or so, and I just think that it is an absolutely fantastic soul and R&B record. Although you put Diana Ross on a record, and I am more than likely to fall in love with it. That being said, though, we're into my top 5, and let's talk about, and both of ours, let's talk about our good buddy Tom. My number 5, Aerial Ballet by Harry Nilsson. Nilsson is an artist that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, but I think Aerial Ballet is an incredible Baroque pop record. Obviously, you have one on here, which is just delightful. There's also stuff like Good Old Desk and Everybody's Talking, Don't Leave Me. Very Beatles-esque at points, but I feel like he has enough character of his own to really sell it. And I just love Harry Nilsson as a singer, which is really what puts it over the edge. And number 4, an album that I don't think that most people really think of when they think of 1968, but I think is another delightful Baroque pop record. It's going to be Idea by the Bee Gees. Early Bee Gees stuff, I know that they don't get talked about as much, but it is so good. Really just apex Baroque pop stuff, with this being my favorite of which. Tracks like I Started a Joke, Let There Be Love, and The Summer of His Years, Down to Earth. There's just so much brilliant stuff across this record. The Bee Gees in the disco era are not just great vocalists, and there's so much to love across Idea. Highly recommend that one. And the last record, that's not quite 4.5 stars. I mean, it's not quite 5 stars. I have 2 5s in this year. 2 of my 3 5 stars in this entire decade come from 68. That just goes to show how high I think of this year. And this is one that I know that I like a good bit more than you. It's going to be Life by Sly and the Family Stone, an artist that I really, really love a lot, with this possibly being my favorite record by them. I think this was the perfect blending of their earlier pop soul sound with the heavy funk rock and sort of tighter playing that they would showcase on later records. Starts out with Dynamite. You got such a fun song like Chicken. Animal is great. Plastic Jim. And I love the closer, Jane is a Groupie. Just so much incredible material across there. But my top 2 were always going to be my top 2. And they're ordered pretty easily for me. Sadly, at number 2, meaning they're not going to get a win in this decade for me, is going to be Sweetheart of the Rodeo by the Byrds. In many ways, the birth of country rock, and one of the greatest parts in that, possibly my favorite country rock record ever. Roger Wingling, Chris Hellman, Graham Parsons. That's just a trinity of players that can do no wrong together, and this record is evidence of that because it's the only thing that they did together. So, good trio there. You ain't going nowhere. I'm a Pilgrim. You don't miss your water. Nothing Was Delivered is a beautiful closer. There's just so much excellence to be found across here. The harmonies, per the usual, are delightful and just front to back. I don't think that the Birds ever came close to creating a project quite as good as that, which can equally be said for my number one of the year, which is a top 10 album in general for me. It's going to be Music from Big Pink by the band. I don't think that the band ever touched this, which is a shame because I love the band. Obviously, Rick Danko, Levon Helm, and of course everybody else, Robbie Robertson. Just so much delightful playing across here. I think that is an immaculately performed record. Obviously, they were the backing band for Dylan, and they bring in that sort of soulful, rootsy rock style, a bit of a country flair to it. And there's just not much that can be said about it that hasn't already been said. The songs are just to die for. Tears of Rage, The Kingdom Come, The Wait, Chest Fever, The Wheels on Fire, I Shall Be Released. It's 42 minutes of essentially perfect folk rock with some of the greatest vocal performances ever laid down. That is just absolutely sensational. And I can't stress enough how much I love that album. Pretty much a 10 out of 10 release for me. One of my favorites in general. Music from Big Pink by the band, my runaway winner, 60.
Well, I knew that one was coming. Nice pick. Yeah, we'll have a little bit to talk about in common, but we'll also diverge. I feel like I'm going to mention this runner-up just because I know how much you love it. Begin the Millennium, another kind of lesser-known psych pop record, more of a sunshine pop sound there. But my actual runner-up is Friends, Beach Boys. Really chill, short record that I think is a bit underappreciated in their catalog. I'm a big fan of that one. Couldn't quite make the cut though. Number 5 goes to The Kinks or the Village Green Preservation Society by the Kinks. Often considered their high watermark. It's without their usual hits and notably flopped commercially, like everywhere. It makes you wonder why when you hear like one lovely like pastoral piece after another. They really open up the sides with a strong bunch of tracks. The 2 Village Greens, Do You Remember Walter, Animal Farm make up some of my favorite tracks. Really helps give it a nice balance. So really good record. My number 4 is one of yours, Music from Big Pink by the band. This one's really cool. It's strong roots rock on the surface, but you have these little extra weird touches, probably best attributed to it being 1968 with psychedelic pop still being big. Something about it makes it a little bit extra special. Things like Tears of Rage and Chest Fever, in particular, they're almost like hypnotic in their own way. One of the all-time great debuts for sure. My number 3, and I'm pretty much representing their whole discography here, Bookends by Simon and Garfunkel. The structure of this record is admittedly a bit messier than the others here. I'm looking at Voices of Old People in the 5 slot, for instance, but the great songs here just destroy. I mean, America, Mrs. Robinson, Hazy Shade of Winter, all in one place. Kicking off your record in 1968 with, after this little intro, a big blaring Moog synth on Save the Life of My Child. Always exciting to throw this one on. Lots of great stuff here. My number 2 will be the Beatles' White Album. Probably my favorite Beatles showed up on some of the other records I've been talking about, like as far as individual songs, but what this one offers is an experience. 30 tracks, double album that gives you a little bit of everything. Track listing that over time kind of takes on a life of its own. If not everything is your cup of tea, there's bound to be something for everybody at least. And I think the Beatles excelled at bringing consistent quality, and that's probably what I like most of this one. Everything is worth your time, even if it's just a curiosity. And then some of them are just great songs in their own right. And that leaves me with my number 1, which I already kind of alluded to, is at least on some days could be my single favorite album. That's Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies. Hard to go wrong when I love every song on here. It's kind of a weird story with them, the Zombies. They had like some early success, released a debut, went a few years releasing a bunch of one-off singles that went nowhere. This one does nothing, and then Time of the Season hits it big with them already disbanded. So it's a bit of a weird story. They record this using, I think, what was lying around in the wake of the Beatles' 67 sessions. And they didn't really use much other than the basics and a mellotron. And yet it's 12 really pretty pop songs that to me should have been like leaving an impression on just about any listener in 68. It's a group with classical training, and they managed to harness these skills into these short, well-crafted bundles. So yeah, that's a big record for me, Odyssey and Oracle.
Nice. I wish that I loved it as much as other people do, because I do think Colin Lundstone is a very good singer. I think there is some incredible songs on there. This doesn't quite hit me on that level. Like I said, it wouldn't even be a top 10 in that year for me. But I mean, hey, more power to you. It's a very good record. So yeah, I think that we both mentioned 68, pretty good. I mean, possible favorite album of all time, top 10 record of all time for me. Yeah, I'd say there's one or two solid things to say about 68. Sorry, Chris. That being said, though, I really hope that everybody enjoyed this discussion upon the best year of the 60s, and that you all have a great time. And we'll join us again for the final year being 1969. You have a great one. Bye.